wondering how I got into this mix.
Next we have Derrick Broze, who's going to come up and speak to you guys. Come on up, give him a round of applause.
All right, what's up, everybody? Give it a round of applause one more time for everybody who's put this together, and for self-love, for the food, and for all the vendors. So I'm going to talk to you guys about something completely opposite of the flat Earth, or what you just heard. But I kind of feel like if nobody walked out on that conversation, then you're okay for what I'm about to talk about. Because generally people run from, it's good to have an open mind. Keep it open, try to keep your brain from falling out, but still be an open mind. And I think a lot of us start off by going down those rabbit holes, and so it's important to have those conversations and to be in a place where you can feel safe to talk about whatever you want, because we go outside of these circles and you're out in public and maybe you don't feel like you can even express yourself, even ask a question like, hey, have you ever thought about this, so it's good for us to have those spaces. But I know that most of the people here don't know who I am, so I've got about 30 minutes. I usually give a presentation that's about an hour and a half, so I'm going to condense all that down to this. I'm going to mention several books, several different apps and references, and you can write them down or you can come ask me afterwards. These are my 2 books. I've written 4 books. I only have 2 of them today, and I've got some shirts and some email sign-up list. If anything I say, if you want to hear more about it, sign up there, come talk to me. But before we get into all that, the way I always start my talks, and I've done this now in Costa Rica, Mexico, all over the US, and last summer here in Brooklyn, I like to start things off with a howl, because, howling is a way for me to sort of celebrate being alive. It's like a breathing exercise, right? It's just remind us that we're alive and make sure everybody who's out there hanging out in the vendors can hear us, so maybe they wander in here. So if you will, take a deep breath with me, and when we release this, just let out a howl, like a wolf. That's exactly what I'm talking about. All right, ready? Yeah, I usually feel better after that. And it's really been like a personal dream of mine. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get the whole world to howl. We're going to organize like an international synchronized howl one day or something. But so my name is Derrick Broze. I wear a lot of different labels and hats in my human form. I'm a freelance investigative journalist. I write for the Anti-Media, Activist Post, Mid-Press News. I'm from Houston. I got a radio show back in Houston, and I've been involved with activism since 2010. I started a group called the Houston Freethinkers. Like some of the things Ryan's talking about, that's where I started, going down rabbit holes, asking these questions, and wanted to create a group where all those questions could be discussed, where there wouldn't be anything off limits. And so it started out first as, if you guys want to come in here, there's more room over here, or come sit up with me. I definitely want everybody to be comfortable. But when we first started out with activism, when I started doing just my role as being an activist in the beginning, it was going down these rabbit holes, doing a lot of research, trying to figure out how to make sense of the crazy world we live in, right? And it led me to create a blog first called the Houston Freethinkers, and then eventually it developed into a real-world community, and we've been active, sort of tapering off recently, but we've been active over the years. For about 8 years, we've been able to raise thousands of dollars for different causes. We have a community space that I live in called the Freethinker House, where we've got a big community garden. We do monthly benefit shows to raise money for survivors of human trafficking, or for the homeless, or community gardens, whatever sort of causes that we want to focus on that month. So I've done the on-the-street activism. I've held signs and marched against the Federal Reserve, marched against Monsanto, and done all that thing. I've been arrested a number of times for civil disobedience, for unjust arrests. I've been had all that fun experience, and along the way I started writing, doing a lot of articles and blogging, and people started offering to pay me, and so it's become what I do now, full-time. What pays my bills is writing articles for the websites I mentioned. That's how I do what I'm doing. So I got into journalism. I didn't go to school for it. It just kind of naturally happened. The universe keeps opening up doors for me, and I just do my part to walk through them. And so, journalist, activist, as I said, I've written these books, so you can throw the label author on me as well, and increasingly I'm speaking to people around the world, so I guess I'm a public speaker now, but at the end of the day, I'm just a free human being trying to figure out how to navigate this crazy world, like most of you guys here, and that's the label that, if anything, I consider myself a free human, because I think that pretty much says it all. We're all free, beautiful, powerful human beings. We're capable of anything that we set our minds to, truly, and especially when we're united together. So, like I said, I started with a lot of the research, not necessarily flat Earth, but just going down those rabbit holes of like who's in control and worrying about all those things. And I think that's important. You got to start somewhere, right? But contrary to what Ryan was saying, I don't care if the Earth is flat or round. I don't care about a lot of those things anymore, even though I still I'll set those nights aside where I'm like, all right, tonight I'm going down the rabbit hole. What's something I haven't researched in a while? But generally, though, my work and what I'm going to talk to you guys about tonight is the practical steps that we could take to change the world, right? Because at the end of the day, the way I tell my flat earther friends is, you know, cool, like maybe we're living in a bubble, maybe like it's an all illusion, like more than likely we're in a matrix and none of this is real anyways, and we're all imagining each other. So, I mean, so at the end of the day, like I can't get out of the dream, the matrix, I can't get out of the bubble, like until we have private space exploration. Like at this point, it doesn't matter to me, because whether I'm in a bubble, whether the Earth's flat or round, I want to make this experience as best as possible, you know? And that's what I'm focused on. So, my website and my book series are called The Conscious Resistance. It's a trilogy of books that explores the intersection of self-governance, what I call anarchism, self-ownership, and spirituality. And I want to tell you why I explore those two things. And I really think that this is probably the perfect avenue for this. So let me step back a little bit. 13 years ago, 2005, I was just about to turn 21, and I was addicted to crystal meth. And I got arrested, got locked up. I ended up getting a felony and doing a total of 18 months behind bars between 2005 and 2008. Just back and forth, probation, parole, and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, before that, I was a very young, angry, depressed dude. I tried to kill myself 3 times while I was a teenager. You know, I was cutting myself, doing a lot of self-harm, and then I discovered drugs, and I was like, holy crap, I feel amazing. I just need to stick as many of these things in my body as possible. That's the answer. Obviously, that didn't get me very far. But, I mean, these days, I think that we're all, again, free, beautiful people, and whatever you choose to do, who you choose to date, what you choose to drink, put in your body, do as you please. But I can say, looking back, I wasn't in a very healthy place. You know, it's not like I was doing crystal meth and also going and, like, jogging and eating healthy. Like, you know, I was not being very, you know, helpful to myself. So when I got locked up, about to turn 21, I get in there, and when I accepted that, like, I'm not going anywhere, like, my mom can't get me out of here, my girlfriend can't get me out of here, none of my friends, like, I can cry as much as I want, like, I'm stuck, I'm here, like, in this place, looking at the calendar, so at least next September, right? I basically just started going through this process of self-reflection, of journaling every single day and asking myself how I got to this position. And also, more specific to my family, I have 3 generations of men, like going back to my great-grandfather who hung himself in prison, was addicted to drugs. My grandfather was also addicted to drugs and got my dad to sell drugs for him when he was like 8 years old. My father is now in his early 50s and he's still struggling with the crack addiction. So when I got locked up, I'm just like, shit, here I go. Like, you know, I guess I'm next in line, you know? And it really caused me to stop and think, like, what the fuck am I doing? How did I get to this place, you know? And what am I gonna do? Because this is not the path I want to go on, you know? And I literally would just write every day, just asking myself how I got to that point. I started writing, you know, letters to my father to try to get those ideas out, just to start processing and doing the healing, which is what I really needed. And then I got out for the final time in October 2008. So after doing 18 months behind bars, getting sober, well, I will say this, sober, when people hear sober, they think that like I'm like straight edge or clean as a whistle. Like, I'll have a drink every now and then. I definitely love cannabis and appreciate cannabis. That helped me get sober off crystal and other things. But I found the balance that was necessary for me, right? And we each have a different balance. But when I got out October 2008, basically, if you remember that time, it was about a month before Obama got elected, and I didn't know shit about politics at that point. I kind of knew that I've always had an anti-authoritarian stance against me. And I was getting in trouble in school because I didn't like what the teachers were telling me to do, and I didn't understand. It was all just a game to me, right? So I had this sort of rebellious, what some people might say, like a rebel without a cause, right? I didn't really have any purpose or direction, but I definitely knew that the systems weren't right. Something just intrinsically felt wrong. And I think that most of us have that from birth, but a lot of times we ignore it. And we're told to ignore it. Like, yeah, maybe this doesn't feel right that I'm supporting the system, or, you know, that my job contributes to this, but I guess I have a nice apartment, I'm getting fat paid, or, you know, whatever. We make excuses for ourselves in order to tell ourselves that we're happy, you know? And I knew that there was something deeper that was keeping me from being happy. So when I got out, I'm sober now, and I'm coming back into the world, and like I said, Obama's about to get elected. I didn't know anything about Obama other than the fact that people were so divided, that people thought this dude was either going to be the savior of the country or the Antichrist or something, you know? I don't know which label you want to throw on him, but I think after a couple of years it became perfectly clear that all presidents are the same. And just to drop this bit of knowledge out there, that if you think things got bad when Donald Trump became president, you haven't been paying attention. It's been going on before that, and Obama, Bush, and Clinton, and everybody else before that. So just throw that one out there. But I came out just really like, whoa, what's going on? All these people are so concerned about this. And I was also sober, like this cloud of depression, of fear and anxiety that I'd been dealing with, and that also the drugs on top of that, was finally lifted. And I got out. I also had the pleasure of having an X on my back as a felon, you know, getting to be judged in a new way by people like, oh no, you're not good enough for this job, no, we can't accept you at this apartment, and these kind of things. And I happened to be living next to a library, and I was going to the library every single day just to apply for jobs. And in that process, I realized, like, whoa, I'm an intelligent person. I like to learn. I like to read. Like, that's what really, I mean, like, I'm just a huge nerd. I spend most of my time at home reading and researching. That's what really makes me happy. I'm only doing these things because I care about the message, and you know, we need to get these ideas out there. But I love to read and I love to learn. One of the first books that I read that really turned me on this path was called Cannabis, A History. And it was, I mean, I think it's probably the best book out there on weed. Not just because it's written from, like, it's not written from a pothead's perspective or anything like that. It goes through, like, the history of this plant, like, way back. Not just drug laws in the US, but way back. The history of the cannabis plant itself. You know, the scientific perspective of it, the chemical perspective of it, and really lays it down. And by the end of that book, which I'll say this is the first book I ever chose to voluntarily take notes on, because I was just like, holy shit, like, this, I'm getting all these downloads, right? And by the end of that book, I was just like, wow. Especially because I'm getting out after a drug charge as part of the drug war, right? And all of a sudden I realized, holy shit, the whole drug war is based on racism, money, lies. Like, that's the roots of it. Look at the Harrison Act of 1914. Look at, like, the beginning of the drug war and how we have thousands and thousands of people in cages for smoking a plant or for doing anything else they want to, you know, victimless crimes. So that was the first thing that really got me thinking, and especially because I'm getting out for drugs. And that was it. I was like, okay, well, what else am I not being taught? And I started tumbling down those rabbit holes we were talking about. And that led to creating the Freethinkers. So the reason I share that story with you is so you kind of have an understanding, some background on why, when I talk about, my message is called the conscious resistance. What I mean by that is, to me, the conscious resistance, it's the moment, the awareness, the realization that the struggle for a more free, ethical, and just world is not only one against the physical institutions of power, say the corporations, the government, and those people that we can put names and labels on, but it's also that internal struggle against our own internal tyrant. And I think many of you guys understand that internal struggle, and maybe some of you understand the other struggle a little bit as well. But what I realized and what I started to see in my path as I got into activism, first, like I said, I went to prison, got into meditation, had the spiritual side already. Then I got into politics, started becoming an activist, and I realized when I was in my activist circles that I would try to talk to people like, hey, have you guys ever thought that maybe this is all a dream and, you know, we're just like consciousness spinning? And just like, I'd say some crazy stuff and they're just like, what are you talking about, bro? Or I'd go to my spiritual consciousness circles and I'd say, hey, have you guys heard of the Federal Reserve? Have you heard of like this police state they're building? And they were like, don't talk about it. You're going to create it if you talk about it. Just ignore the things that are going on in the world. And hey, maybe some of you that's your path, but I don't think that's going to get us where we want to be. And so I started realizing, I'm like, why? You know, I can't really be myself on this circle. I can't really be my full self in this circle. And then summer 2013, I had another, like, I guess, upgrade where I couldn't sleep for 4 days and I'm like watching David Icke videos all night and all kinds of stuff. And then like the conscious resistance just showed up in my head. I'm like, okay, it's time to just, I can't hide myself anymore. I have to just fully embrace that I'm both a spiritual being that wants to liberate my mind, my body, my spirit, but also that I'm fighting for struggling in the physical world as well. We can't completely be stuck in, you know, up in the ether all the time and just consciousness. We have a physical form, you know, and we also can't forget about the spirit and the deeper levels as well. Like, so they're two sides of the same coin. So my books, the Conscious Resistance trilogy, is basically, as far as I know, the only book series, me and my buddy John Vibes, that explores the intersection of the struggle for freedom in the physical realm, as well as looking at historical traditions. Look at Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, and isms that don't really have a name, like indigenous teachings, native traditions, and you look at the roots of them, and they are very anti-authoritarian. Christ wasn't telling people to go follow the priest or go follow the church, and neither was Muhammad. And most of these traditions, they were telling people that the kingdom of God is inside of you, and, you know, to find that, to find our own connection to the divine source. So I see, you know, very common ground there. That, you know, if you're looking for freedom in the internal sense, then you also have to balance that, I believe, with the physical sense. So that's sort of just sums up what a lot of my books and work focus on. But what I want to talk to you guys about tonight is more what I've been talking about lately. You can see my shirt, it says Holistic Anarchism, and my talks recently have focused on holistic activism or holistic anarchism. I'm an anarchist. Who here knows what anarchy means? Anybody? I know I got a few anarchists in the house, but I'm going to go ahead and just break it down because I know that there's lots of propaganda out there and there's people who are misinformed. We have things like the purge too, anarchy, and like, you know, these things that are, what are they making you think? They want you to think that word, that idea means chaos, destruction, you know, and what it really means when you look at the word anarchy, without rulers, it doesn't mean that we couldn't have rules and organization in our own communities. It simply means that each of us own ourselves, and that is immoral, wrong, unjust, impractical for somebody else to come tell you, this is how you should live, this is who you should date, this is what you should smoke, this is what you should dress like and act. That's what government, that's what other people, external, centralized institutions outside of us want to do. Other people want to dictate how to live. We might have ideas and see somebody and say, damn, I can't believe they're eating meat, I wish they were vegan, right? But we know that it's wrong to go shove vegan food in their mouth, right? Like that's wrong, right? You can conversate, you can communicate, you can have a dialogue and try to reach an understanding, but it's always going to be wrong to use force on another person. And all anarchism is the absence of rulers and the absence of force. What that means is that you recognize that you each here are free, powerful, beautiful human beings, and that you don't need anybody else to rule over your lives. And when you recognize that about other people, the implication is, when you recognize that about yourself, the implication is that so is everybody else, right? If you're like, I'm a divine being put here by God to change the world and to create something better, and it's wrong for anybody to stop me from my purpose. Well, it's wrong for everybody else as well. And it seems like a very simple idea. We've heard about these things since we were in kindergarten. Sometimes it's the golden rule, right? Treat other people the way you want to be treated. But then we get into the real world, right? The real world. And we get into working jobs and doing things that do harm other people and taking actions. And I'm not even talking about physical actions, but the way we communicate as well. Another big idea that I want to just at least mention, in case I forget, is nonviolent communication. Anybody here heard of nonviolent communication? Look up a book by Marshall Rosenberg called Nonviolent Communication. We also talk about it in my books. It's just a great, simple, amazing tool to help us form dialogue, because I don't necessarily think that words themselves can be violence, but I do think that we can be passive-aggressive towards each other. We can be, we can be limiting to other people. There's always judgments. I mean, I see so many people, and we're all guilty of it. So I'm constantly trying to keep myself in check and keep like, okay, why did that feeling arise when I saw that person, or what made me think that thought about them? And instead of judging other people, trying to put out what I want to put out there. But what NVC, what nonviolent communication is all about, is helping us recognize that typically conflicts arise whenever a person feels like their needs are not being met, right? So me and you are talking, and every time you try to say something, I just interrupt you because I'm so excited about what I'm talking, right? And maybe it's not even malicious, but I just keep interrupting you, right? You have a need to be heard, to communicate something, and I'm stepping on top of that need. I'm not letting you fulfill that need. Eventually you might just be like, shut the fuck up, I have something to say, It's because that need hasn't been met. So conflicts arise when individuals can't meet their needs, and it happens all day long in conversation. And the book NVC is just a very simple, easy way to help you kind of work these practices in. So I just mentioned that because it is intrinsic to the things I talk about. I'm trying to promote this idea of holistic activism, right? Holistic anarchism. What does that mean? We defined anarchism already, right? Without rulers. Everybody got that concept. So next time you're out in public and you hear somebody say, oh my God, look at that train wreck over there, it's anarchy. You can say, no, that's not anarchy. This is what anarchy is, right? Because there's just so much propaganda, and some of us who are in the anarchist movement would say that it's done by design, that governments and powerful people don't want people to really understand what that idea means. Instead, they want us to think anarchy means without government, there would be chaos, But I have a little bit more faith in us as free, beautiful people in order to organize in our communities. So, we get what anarchism means. Now, what does holistic mean? In these circles, the word is tossed around very frequently, and I rarely ever hear anybody define it. So it's interesting to stop and ask somebody, well, do you know what holistic means? Because they're like, oh, we're talking tonight about holistic sexuality, or we've got holistic gardening, or we've got like my food's holistic, and all these different things. But there's actual meaning, there's a definition to the word. And it comes from the philosophy of holism. So holism is a philosophy that basically says that, not that the individual parts of something aren't important, but rather than only focusing on the individual pieces, that you take an examination of the whole, right? So when it comes to holistic ecology is the study of the planet and humanity as one single entity, rather than separating them and breaking them down. And it really it changes the way you see something. There's also holistic psychology. Most of us are familiar with the term holistic medicine, which all that means is, instead of with like Western medicine, they see you've got an illness and they just zero in on that one illness. Holistic medicine, let's look at the whole body, right? Let's try to see what's the root of this. So then when we're talking about holistic activism, what it means then is to not only focus on the problems and the external things that we see, that we can easily identify, but to look at those situations and say, how am I contributing to that? So I'm going to give you guys a few examples of that. So typically when we think of activists, people think of an activist as somebody who's like out on the street holding signs or rallying and marching. I think that's a misnomer, and it's a silly way to think about it, because even though I don't spend as much time on the streets as I used to, I'm an activist every day in the conversations that I have, you know, in the way that I live my life, in the relationships that I develop, and again with communication, the way I communicate to another person. Every time you choose to interact with another free, beautiful, powerful human being in a voluntary fashion, that takes power away from them, you know, because we're not dividing each other, we're not breaking each other down, we're coming together. So to be a holistic activist would mean to look at the situation, right? Because the easiest thing in the world is to go out and say, I see a problem. Monsanto is poisoning our food, or the Federal Reserve is stealing through us with, you know, economic enslavement, or the government's building a police state around us. It's easy to point the fingers, and then you start doing the research, and you're like, oh yeah, it's the Rothschild, and you start making, you can identify the people and the names of the places that you hold responsible. But how often do we turn around and say, well, what role am I playing, you know? So 2 quick examples I'm going to give. March Against Monsanto, and I participated in Houston. How many people participated in New York or wherever you're from? I mean, it was a global movement. They had like 500 the first year, cities all around the world. And the idea was people are just marching out the streets, trying to hold Monsanto, you know, responsible, whether they were worried about the environment, bees or pesticides, or just Monsanto's close connection to the US government. People were upset, right? And in Houston, we partnered with the March Against Monsanto and said, okay, after the march is over, why don't we go to the community garden and everybody learn how to build, you know, grow our own food, because isn't that the long-term solution? Now, it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that when we were out marching against Monsanto, there's 400 or 500 people there, and then once that wrapped up and we went to the community garden, we had less than a handful of people, because they weren't thinking holistically, you know. And in fact, even maybe after the march ended, they wanted to go celebrate, so they went out for lunch, and they sit down and they're eating GMO corn chips, and, you know, they're shooting themselves in the foot, right? Not thinking holistically. That's not a judgment on anybody. It's just the reality of the situation. Another example, the End the Fed. A couple years ago, there was these End the Federal Reserve rallies taking place all around the country. And people are spending their hard-earned money and time and energy to build stages, and like we flew Danny out to Houston one time, like people are flying speakers from all around the country, they're putting all this money and energy into it, right? And they're out there in Houston, they're like giving these speeches like, we're gonna tear that building down, like right across from the Federal Reserve, right? And everybody's celebrating and feeling good, you're making these connections, and then you're like, I'd like to buy one of these End the Fed shirts, and then you pull out a Federal Reserve note and pay for it. So you're using the institution that you're trying to bring down or end, you're using their money. So that's, again, not thinking holistically. So then what does a holistic activist do in that situation? A holistic activist says, okay, let's start a little backyard garden. Let's learn about those steps. Let's take some permaculture classes. Let's get together as a group and do those things, right? A holistic activist says, okay, well, you know what, guys, instead of spending all this time, money, and energy on this giant rally, which rallies can be a good place to network, right? I mean, you can, that's where some people, they first get excited, like, oh, I'm out in the street. And the first time you go to the street and hold a sign, it can be an empowering thing. You feel like your voice is being heard. But you very quickly find out, like, okay, there's only so many times we can march up and down the street and have cars honk at us and wave at us, and you know, it's like a sanction by the police tell you where to go, and it's just, there's nothing revolutionary or evolutionary about that. But a holistic activist just looks at the problem, identifies the problem, and then asks themselves how they're contributing to it, and then takes steps to remove themselves from the situation. For me, as a holistic anarchist, it goes a little bit deeper than that. I don't believe in decentralized institutions that are based on force and violence, and when I look at the government, that's what I see force and violence. If any of us right here have, let's say, like, who here supports the idea of Trump's wall? Let's just start with something easy. Yeah, I didn't think so, right? But guess what? If you're paying taxes, every time you get your paycheck, when they take that 1/3 out of it, it's going to fund that wall. It's going to fund the surveillance state. It's going to fund the wars. In case people have forgotten, and I keep having to say this because, damn it frustrates me sometimes. People are dying right now in other countries, 7 countries that the US is occupying right now, and there's no anti-war movement in this country anymore. But it's important for people to know that that's still happening. People are still dying. Children, women, schools being bombed, hospitals. And it's coming from our pockets. It's coming from our pockets, whether we like it or not. So I haven't paid taxes in 8 years because I can't rightfully, morally stand by. And it's made my life difficult in some ways. You know, I'm in the middle of trying to find an apartment and they're like, okay, well, can I see your check stubs? I'm like, all my money's digitally or crypto. Okay, can I see your bank statement? I stopped using banks 10 years ago. Can I see your tax record? Don't got that either. You know, but my point here is, for me, when I look at the institution of the government, and not just the US government, but I think that anytime us as individuals try to rule over other people, it will always devolve to this situation. Because at the end of the day, I can't decide what's best for you. You know, I have a lot of ideas and I've put them into books and I go around and give talks, but that doesn't mean I want to be, you know, sometimes people will be like, oh, you need to run for office. And I'm like, I don't think you've been listening to me. You totally missed the whole point here. Because I don't know what's best for anybody else, and you don't know what's best for me, and Donald Trump doesn't know what's best for us, and Obama doesn't know what's best for us, and Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and all the rest of them, they don't know what's best for us. We know what's best for us as individuals, and what works for me in my community in Houston might not work for you out here in Brooklyn, but we can share ideas, we can collaborate, and we can adapt it to our local communities. So I'm kind of like mixing all of my talks here together because I have such a short time, so I hope this is somewhat working out. Yeah, like I said, come talk to me. It's in the books, it's in my head, we can just collab and talk all night. But for me, what that means to be a holistic activist or a holistic anarchist is I try to remove myself from institutions that I don't support. I don't support the banks because, well, they robbed this whole country blind in 2008 and before that, and it's been happening for generations. I don't support the Federal Reserve Bank, which, if you don't know, if you pull out a dollar, I know I've got one somewhere, it says Federal Reserve notes, so your dollars are owned by this private bank, right? So I try to limit my use of that. Obviously, my landlord doesn't take alternative payments yet, so I have to pay him in dollars at the end of the month, right? But there are more and more opportunities, and because, I mean, we live in such a beautiful time where we can balance the technology that is emerging right now. I mean, I don't know if you guys really understand this, but Facebook, right? It's only Facebook, YouTube, these things have been around for only a decade. And think about how much our lives have been evolutionized and revolutionized in that time. So we're at a very early stages where technology has the ability to decentralize our lives and to allow us to have more freedom. That's what I'm going to focus on next, is decentralization. Last year I did a 45-city summer tour of the entire United States. It was called the Decentralize Your Life Tour. And it was about taking these concepts and thinking about how can we opt out, how can we decentralize from systems that don't support us and redirect our time, our money, and our energy into systems that do serve the health and the wealth of our communities. Unfortunately, when we look around, people are like, okay, I'm with you, like, yeah, I want to opt out of this, but there's nothing there for them to put their energy into, right? Because we haven't built it yet. I mean, we're at a very early stage of this. And this philosophy has a name, it's called Agorism. I don't know if I really have time to get too much into it, but just suffice it to say, the whole idea is to opt out of systems that you don't support. It's called counter-economics. The mainstream economy is the white market. As I said earlier, if you've got a check, whenever they're taking money out of you, it's going into that white market, right? I work in the black and gray markets. This means anything that the state considers to be illegal or that they would prefer me to get a license for, I don't do it. It's a form of economic civil disobedience, economic secession, and it's because, again, I don't support them. So any of you who've ever paid the neighbor kid to mow the lawn and you gave him a couple of bucks, I don't think you charged him taxes on that, right? So that's gray market, right? Anytime you've been to a yard sale and you bought something without a third party involved, that's the gray market. Now, anytime you've bought cannabis from somebody or something that's illegal, right, that's the black market. And some people will say, well, what's the power in that? What is that doing? You know, what are you really doing with that? Well, what it is a perfect example of two free people coming together voluntarily and communicating, doing a business exchange, whether that means exchanging sex, prostitution, right, or exchanging goods, services, food, whatever it may be. The idea is that there's no third party involved. There's no third party taking money away. There's no third party forcing them. I mean, tonight is a perfect example. Nobody here had a gun held, as far as I know, had a gun held to them and was forced to be here, right? You all came here on your own volition. You came here voluntarily. That is freedom right there. That is decentralization. That is people coming here, finding some sort of value. You came here because you wanted to connect, you wanted to hear new ideas, you wanted to get dank-ass vegan food, or you wanted to dance, or whatever it may be. You came here for a purpose. Nobody forced you to be here. Our lives can be like that every single day. But we have these institutions that are standing in the way of that, and that are inhibiting human progress. These institutions come in the form of centralization. You can call them government, you can call it corporate power. It comes in many different names and many different flavors. But at the end of the day, those institutions are the ones that are inhibiting the progress that I'm talking about. But I do believe that technology and just communication like this is helping us build these systems. I've helped build a website. It's called freedomcells.org. That's CELLS.org. Please write that down, guys, if you can, or take it on your phone. It's a website that helps you build these groups that I'm talking about. So Freedom Cells are decentralized peer-to-peer groups formed for the purpose of sharing knowledge, opting out of the system. So that might mean you want to opt out of the unsustainable, inhumane factory farms. So then you get together with your cell, your core group of 5, 6, 7, 8 people, and you start working on local community garden projects. You know, you start thinking of, hey, let's find out more about this crypto thing we keep hearing about, or let's look into creating an alternative currency in our community. It's about having that core group, support group that you can lean on as you start exiting the system. And it doesn't, you know, don't expect to go from where you're at now to the position I'm in, and I still got a ways to go for me to personally feel happy. But it's about taking those steps to opt out. So what the website does, it's basically a social network of some sort, but this isn't the kind of social network where you go post pictures of your food or your cats on. This is a social network that allows you to create a profile. You can put in what your skills are, what your interests are, and then you can search by skills and interests, and it'll show you on a map people who have joined and how far they went. You can search 0.5 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles, and it'll show you people there. And these are people who are joining this website not just to join a new website, but with the purpose of actually meeting in the real world. So it's a digital tool to help us connect in the real world. I'm actually going to be doing I've started doing international conference calls once a month for people who are interested in this idea, because I've been promoting it for about 2.5 years now, and there's people from Australia, New Zealand, all over the US who've said, hey, we call them circles, or ours are called hubs, or we don't have a name for it. It doesn't matter what you want to call it. The point is that it's time for us to decentralize, to localize, and none of us, as powerful and beautiful as we are, we're also part of a collective. You know, I don't think that means we have to give up our individuality to be a part of that collective, but we're better served when we work together, right? You know, because as much as I am an introvert and I like to isolate myself and be in solitude, I realize that in order for the goals that I have to be accomplished, I need to work with other people. And that's why I'm here, trying to work with you guys, trying to develop these concepts. So, holistic activism, holistic anarchism, freedom cells, the conscious resistance. I don't know where I'm at on time. 8 minutes or so? 7 minutes? Okay, cool. So one other thing I want to mention to you now, I started out with sharing a little bit of my personal story, and you know, I had to go through a lot of those struggles, and I will say that I'm still in the process of healing. You know, I recently just took a trip to Costa Rica and was out there on the beach writing more letters to my dad to try to, you know, I'm still healing from this stuff. So it's a constant process. I'm not sitting here trying to speak to you guys as if I got this shit all figured out, because I need you guys' help as much as I think that we need each other, right? So, you know, my message is both one of internal work as well as building these physical systems, because as I said earlier, we can't only be up in the spirit and just assume that things are going to fix themselves, because there's still a physical world that exists. So we have to find a way to connect both the spirit, the struggle against our own internal tyrant, which your internal tyrant are those doubts, fears, insecurities that a lot of us limit ourselves. I mean, I used to be the kind of guy that, like, I'd knock a cup over and spill something, and I'd be talking shit to myself for the next hour in my head, like, God, you're such an idiot. Did you see the way they looked at you? Like, just beat myself up, you know? And when you do that, whatever you tell yourself, whether it's positive or negative, that's the way you're programming yourself, you know? Every day somebody's trying to program us, whether it's that corporate advertising, that ad on YouTube, you know, the school, whatever it is, somebody's trying to program us. So the idea then would be to be in control of that space. Somebody's trying to, like, anybody ever heard of John Trudell? He was a if not, you need to look up John Trudell, look up his speeches. He passed away a couple of years ago. He was a very amazing, eloquent Native American activist. And he used to say that not only are these people, you know, that they're mining the earth for its resources, but that they're mining our minds for our resource. And what's our most important resource? That space right here. That, you know, the power of our mind and what's in there. So they want to get in our heads, right? But sometimes we don't even need them to do it. We do it to ourselves, or we do it to each other. We make fun of each other, we judge each other, we make people feel like they're outsiders, you know, we cast them outside, and then how does that affect them? How does that affect the rest of their life and their ability to connect and to find their own light? So it's important to think about how we're communicating with each other. So it's a struggle, both physical and mental and physical. My most recent project that I just put out 2-3 weeks ago, and I did mention this, but these books and the other one that's missing tonight, they're all downloadable for free on my website. Like, if you don't pick one up tonight, go home and download it. Please check it out. And if you don't have any money and you want the book, come over to me and I will hand it to you, because it's more important to me that you go home with it than it goes home with me in my bag. So, the latest project, though, that I've been working on and I just released, and it's only in digital form right now because I'm hoping to actually get a publisher for these ones. I self-published all my books because this what I'm about to share with you, it has the potential to reach a lot more people than just our circles and just our bubbles. It's meant for a mainstream audience, but it's the same message. But it doesn't say politics, it doesn't say activists, it doesn't say anarchism, it doesn't say any of these things. It just helps people take themselves through this process, basically the process that I took myself when I got locked up, of self-reflection. It's called the holistic self-assessment. And all the books are at theconsciousresistance.com/books. You can come pick up my card and get the link to it. But the holistic self-assessment is basically the process that I was talking about, not just applied to activism. Like if you look at this symbol, think about each of these little vectors or circles. This is economy, this is relationships, this is education, this is food. And you start looking at each of these different areas of your life and asking, are these in line with my principles? And plenty of times people out there, they say they want to leave the world a better place, they want to change things, maybe they want to, they want to get rid of the government or whatever your goals are, right? But then you look at their actions, and they're not aligning. There's inconsistencies. So this book, The Holistic Self-Assessment, it's only 33 pages. It's meant to be a workbook where you can get yourself a new notebook, download the PDF, follow along, and at the end of each chapter there's little simple exercises to help you get to know yourself on a deeper level, to ask yourself, what are the principles that guide you? I mean, I've realized in my work that a lot of times people don't know what a principle means, let alone what the principles are that guide them. So they may state one thing like, oh, I want to change the world for the better, right? But then you look at your choices and your actions, you're like, wow, shit, I'm all over the place. Like my stated principles and my goals and my habits don't align. And so this book, the first thing is, who am I? The second one is, what are my principles? What are my goals? What are my habits? And then looking at your relationships and seeing where there's these inconsistencies. Not so that I or anybody can say, you're living wrong, but so that you as an individual can say, okay, you know what? Maybe I don't want to change the world. That sounds like a lot of work. Forget that. Ideally, the hope is that you'll be like, okay, I've got a lot of work to do. Let me get to this. And we can actually start implementing these things. Because what I do believe is, even if the concept of freedom sells, and it's definitely growing. There's people around the world building these groups and joining the conference calls and stuff like that. But even if we implement that and people start decentralizing and opting out from the economic system and the food production system, and we start growing gardens all over the place and just this beautiful world that we know is possible, even if we do that in the physical realm, I believe that if we don't do the internal work, it may take 50 to 100, 200 years, but we're going to cycle right back to the same shit. We're going to probably become the people we've been fighting, and we've seen that. I'm a student of history and radical movements, and every time somebody came about and said that they were going to fix everything for everybody, all we had to do was put them in power, and they would fix everything, they end up becoming the tyrants that they fought. Maybe by design, or maybe because we're not meant to rule over each other. We're meant to see that we are each divine and sovereign, beautiful people that can come together in agreement, right? So I believe the answer to avoid that is to do this internal work. And for me, the holistic self-assessment is part of that. So I would be honored and very much appreciate if you guys check it out on theconsciousresistance.com/books. You'll see all the books. Just click on the page and it says download the PDF. And get yourself a new notebook and take your time working through this. It's not something that's meant to be rushed. It's, marinate on each question for a couple days. And also the other thing I'll say about that as I start to wrap up is, the more honest you are with yourself, the more you're going to get out of it, right? So if you're at a point in time in your life where you're not ready to dig down into all those deeper issues, we all got them in different ways. I don't care who you are, how famous you are on the internet, or what, who you think you are. At the end of the day, we each have doubts, fears, and insecurities. They may look different, and they may express themselves differently, but we each have them there. So the goal then is to work on that, to empower ourselves so that we can become the better people that we know are possible. And through that, while also building these physical institutions, counter economy, and opting out of the system, we're going to create that beautiful world that I believe is possible. And I think that you guys also think is possible. Whew. All right, I think I'm just about out of time. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm very humbled by your attention, and I appreciate that. And please continue to give your attention to the rest of the speakers. I want to end the way that I always do, and that's with a positive affirmation. You might see Vinny's got the shirt on. These are one of our shirts too. So if you feel inclined, if you can hear my voice, just repeat these words after me. And this is not, I want you to think about this. Positive affirmations are not just supposed to be some mindless mantra that we repeat to ourselves to feel better in the moment, like everything's okay, everything's okay. That's not what it's meant to be. Hear these words, feel them when you say them, and know that they are true, and then live them, okay? This is something that has helped me in difficult times, and I would appreciate if you join me. I am powerful. I am beautiful. And make sure everybody can hear you on this one. I am free. I am free. Thank Thank you guys so much for your time.
We're here for human connection and to touch each other and share with each other. We can't do this alone. Not one person has all the answers. And it's important to talk with each other and to communicate because we each have a piece of the whole. Remember, we are all God in creation. We are all one, but we are separate individuals here as human beings. So it's important to share and it's important to listen. So I love the how and the wolf representation. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. So, how's everybody feeling? Yeah? Alright, so we're gonna have a 10-minute intermission, 10-minute break. You guys can stand.